Welcome to Wonder Wednesday. Lovely to have you join me again. What does a party horn blower and flowering plants have in common? Well, stay tuned and we'll find out, because this week's Wonder Wednesday is called What's the Point of a Proboscis? And I've got to check that I'm saying that word correctly, because it's not a term, it's not a piece of vocabulary I've heard much before. In fact, I've dialed it up on my phone to check that I'm pronouncing it correctly. Let's just check.
Proboscis.
Proboscis, yes I am. Welcome. This week's theme is about the outdoors. We're going to look at these flowering plants. We're going to learn about the parts of the plant which enable them, allow them to pollinate, and so they can reproduce. And we're going to learn a little bit about the role of insects and their proboscis, which looks a little bit like a party horn like this. You might have seen it rolling out of the front of butterflies or other insects. We're going to learn about the role of these in the pollination process. But before we do all that, as we've done in previous weeks, let's jump onto the Great Science Share website, because the Great Science Share is not just about us sharing our passion and love of science with you, but it's about hearing from what you're doing in your school, sharing back with us as well. So let me just gently slide, there I am, hello, slide these apart, and I'm going to jump onto the computer and I'm going to go to the Great Science Share website, which you should see there. Yeah, super. So last week we talked about a fantastic project where you can actually find bits of meteorite in your gutters. Yes, bits of meteorite are raining down on the earth all the time, and some of them can collect in the gutters. So let me share with you this fantastic work of a school in Wales. Now I'm going to go for a pronunciation here. Tywyn. I hope I've said that correctly. If I haven't, I do apologise. But you have been doing some amazing work as part of the Great Science Share at your school in finding these bits of meteorite that were in your gutters. And look, you can see them there. If I remember rightly, looking briefly at the project that I was talking about here, you can do it by sort of sifting out and filtering and then identifying bits of potentially magnetic materials in the guttering, which means it's likely to have an iron content to it. And that's exactly what they've been doing. So thank you so much for sharing your science that you have been up to as a result of tuning in to the Great Science Share events each week. If you are doing some science in your school, please do share it with us. And it's really easy to do. You just go to the Share Your Science page, and here are all the different ways that you can share your science. And our preferred method is the uploader. Use the uploader and send us pictures or videos of what you have been up to. Make sure, of course, you've got all the right permissions. But then please let us know, because I would love to share some more of the work that's going on out there. And also remember that, now let me just get this right to go to the right place. If, teacher pack, yes, if you use our Share It, and here they are here's a Share It. Share It, if you upload a Share It, then your share goes into a drawer, and if you get pulled out, you win a curiosity box set of where you get your own tools and a bit of kit to do some even more great sciencey, engineering-y, invention-y investigations. So please do share your great science with us. Right, let me come back to, there we go. You got a little bit of a hint there what was coming next. Let me come back to that screen there. So thank you to that school for sharing. I look forward to receiving more shares next week as well. So back to this week then. What's the point of a
proboscis?
And there we go. I might just use that instead because I can't say it very well. And this is all to do with how plants are pollinated and pollinate, and then that enables them to reproduce. So we get more flowering plants. Now, a proboscis, I popped up with my fake proboscis here. And you might have noticed insects have a proboscis. And I showed you a quick picture there with an example of an insect showing its proboscis, and it was a butterfly. Let me go back to that. Here you go. You should be able to see that. Can you see the proboscis on the at the front there, off mounted, sort of coming out of the head of the butterfly there? We've got his eyes on the side, either side of the head, and this is the proboscis. Now the proboscis is important in enabling the butterfly to get to what's called nectar in flowering plants. Let me come back to the picture here. And in doing so, it requires the nectar as a food source, a source of energy. But actually, in the butterfly and other insects getting at that nectar on the plants and moving around to different plants to feed from the nectar, they actually cause something called pollination, which is what enables plants to reproduce. It's really clever, as nature is. Everything's dependent on one another. So let's just look at a few of the a labelled diagram of a few of the parts, important parts of a flowering plant to enable this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go on a plant safari. So I've got my iPad set up. I've got these beautiful flowering plants here, and hopefully you can see the colours of these. The lily really is incredible there. And I'm going to dive in as close as I can with my iPad so we can see if we can spot all of the parts of the plant that we saw in this diagram. So here's the diagram. Let's jump on to this here. We're going to go screen share, and let's make that nice and big there. Hopefully you should be able to see it. Now this is a diagram from BBC Bitesize, so just to acknowledge that I haven't made this diagram, I've got it from the BBC Bitesize page, which is a fantastic page all about flowering plants. And these are the different parts of the plant that we want to try and look out for, because they're all important in this process of pollination. So let's work our way around. I'll talk to you a little bit about each one, and then we'll see if we can spot them when we come to do our plant safari. So the stamen here, the stamen is actually made up of two parts. This long part here that goes up to the top part, that's called the filament. And on the top of the stamen we have the anther, and one of them's labelled there. So we have the filament and the anther. And the anther contains pollen, and that's really important that it's got the pollen on the anther. Then what we have is we have the stigma, okay? And the stigma is in the centre of the plant, and that runs down to the ovule. Okay, so we've got the ovule underneath, and it runs up to the stigma. And right down on the outside of the ovule, right around the centre of the flower part of the plant, we have that nectar, the sweet, sugary, energy-rich, sticky liquid which our bees, butterflies and other insects are trying to get at. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to, let's come back to the, there I am there. I'm going to now have a look in these plants to see these flowers, to see if we can find those parts. And as we do, I'm going to talk you through the process of what happens when insects go after that nectar. So let's get the iPad. Now we used the iPad last week so that we could do, we could see the crater test experiment, and it worked okay. So let's cross our fingers it's going to work again. I think it is. If we go there, yes, here we go. Let's go, camera. Yeah, okay, can you see me? Yay, probably not the best angle that. There we go. Right, so let's have a dive in, okay. Look at these beautiful colours. I mean, they really are incredible. And actually, I keep saying that, but I should make a point here. Why do we think, look at that, why do we think that the petals are so brightly coloured? I wonder why that is. Let's have a think. Have a think to yourself, and maybe you could talk to the person next to you, as long as that's okay with your class teacher. If plants and petals were really boring coloured, like just a grey or an off-white, although I shouldn't say that because we've got grey and off-white, would a passing insect, do you think they'd be particularly interested in them? Maybe, maybe not. Why do you think that is? Well, you're probably saying to yourself something, well, yeah, the insects are probably going to be a bit more attracted to something which is so beautifully coloured like this, and you'd be right. And over through the process of evolution, which is how all of these living things adapt to their environment and become better at doing what they need to do, i.e. reproduce, over time the plants which were more brightly coloured were more likely probably to get pollinated, and therefore those are the types of plants which have continued to thrive. So we end up with brightly coloured plants and flowers because they are more attractive to insects. If an insect's flying past this, it's probably going to think, oh, I'll stop there, that looks lovely, let's go and have a look, see if there's any nectar there. And they would be right in thinking that there is, because let's just see if you can zoom right down in there. Now if I'm very, very careful and I get my finger in, I can feel it, it's sticky. Can you see? Let's see if you can see on my finger there. Can you see it glistening? There it is. That's the nectar. Okay, the nectar is right down in the centre of the flower here. So this is our first flower. This is the lily, and you can see really clearly on the lily that we've got the stamen, which is made up of the filament and the anther. And we said to ourselves, well, when we were learning before, that the anther is the part which holds the pollen. So I reckon if I rub my finger along this anther here, we should get some pollen. Let's have a look. Look at that. Can you see? There's our pollen. Okay. Now it's the pollen. Look at that. It's like dust, bright orange dust. Okay, and it stains actually. So I was about to wipe it on my trousers, but I won't. I'll just rub it between my hands. There you go. Can you see my hands going kind of an orange colour? Now it's the pollen which is in the air in the summer months, which can actually cause people to have a bit of an allergy to well, people do have an allergy to it. It causes them to get all bunged up and sniffles, etc. So we can see there we've got our filament, we've got our anther, the pollen is on it, and this here, if you remember from the diagram before, is our stigma. Now what happens is our insect comes in, bzzz, wants to go for the nectar right down in the centre here, and as they do, they rub on the pollen, on the anther, and the pollen actually then rubs off on them. You might occasionally see bees with the sacks of pollen around their legs, and we'll talk about bees a bit more in a minute because we're going to meet someone who loves bees and keeps bees. And then as they continue to move around trying to get in a bit more nectar over here, eventually they rub their pollen off on the stigma, and the pollen travels down the stigma into the ovule, and it's there which it's converted into seeds. Okay, and that's how the plant becomes pollinated and then can reproduce and produce more plants. So there's the example on the lily, and the lily is one of the clearest examples to see because it does have these really large anthers with the filaments and the stigma all really clear on there. But let's also have a look over at the UFP, unidentified flowering plant. Please do let me know what this is. But look in there as well. We can see on this one that we again have these bright coloured petals to attract the insects, and we have clearly anthers with our pollen. Pollen is a bit darker on this one. Can you see? It's like almost like a charcoaly dark grey. And we have our stigma in the middle there as well, and that will mean that just underneath the top of, I'll just try and get it a bit clearer for you, underneath the stigma we will have our ovule, which is where then the seeds will form. So we can see it on that one there. The other type of plant I've got in here are roses. And it's really interesting here because I can't quite see these parts yet on the rose, but I was wondering as to whether or not that's because at the moment they haven't quite opened up yet. So I did buy these plants a few days ago so that I would make sure that they'd opened up so that I could film this for you. But we can't see inside the roses. So maybe another task for me, as well as identifying these plants for me, maybe you could double check to make sure that roses have them as well, and perhaps send me any pictures of what they look like when they're opened up, when you can see the different parts that we've been talking about. So there we go, there's another task you can do today. So let's just have one last check in here. There we go, look at that fantastic shot you can see in there. We've got the stigma right in the centre there, you can see, and we've got the stamen around it with the anther and the filaments as well. Fantastic. Okay, so let's just pop that back on there. And come back to, there I am. So, a little bit of a plant safari there to talk about the different parts of the plant, the flower, and how those different parts help this process of pollination. Now, you've got various tasks to do today as part of the sheet that goes along with this Wonder Wednesday, and a part of what you're going to do is create your own model of a flowering plant, the flower part of it, to think about the type of
proboscis.
The type of proboscis that an insect might need in order to get into the nectar in your plant. Now, what I mean by that is that with something like the lily, as an example, because it's quite open, the insect could get down, sort of sit on the edge of the plant, and it wouldn't need a very long proboscis if it wanted to just dip it into the nectar in there. But some plants have a real kind of deep cone shape to their petals, and therefore an insect with a shorter proboscis might not be able to actually get down into the nectar. So there's this lovely connection, again through the process of evolution, between the types of plants that suit all of the different insects with different length proboscis, and you're going to think a little bit more about that. We've got a fantastic example here from Claire, thanks for sending this in, Claire, of a type of an example of a model. Let's make that a little bit bigger. There you go. This is the kind of thing you're going to be aiming for. She's made a fantastic model of a flowering plant with the petals and the stigma and the stamen all together in there. And she was thinking then about, what kind of proboscis would an insect need in order to get into that plant. I think you can access, it's quite deep, that, isn't it? So maybe you need quite a long proboscis to get down to the nectar in that one. So thank you very much for sharing that, Claire. Now, finally, before I head off and say cheerio until next week, the last thing I want to do is share a really cool video with you. And this is from Hayley Sherrod. Thank you, Hayley. Hayley is passionate about bees. She loves bees. She loves keeping bees. And bees are, it's just a nice word to say, isn't it? Bees. Bees are really important because they are great pollinators. So they do a lot of that work of flying past flowering plants, going, ooh, look at the lovely colours, diving in, getting the nectar, getting covered in pollen, moving the pollen from the stamen to the stigma to make sure that these plants can then reproduce and grow more plants. So bees, hugely important, and she's a beekeeper, and we're going to watch this video from her now about bees.
Here I've got a frame out of the hive, and you can see there's all the honeycomb in here that the bees have made, hexagonal shape, all made from wax. They get all the things they need from the plants and trees, and you'll see, by taking in closely, you might see some of the capped brood in there, the bits with the covers over them. These cells have got a larvae in, little grubs, that the worker bees will be looking after and keeping an eye on. These larger areas over here, these larger capped brood is going to be drone, so that's like larger, that'll be the males hatching out of there. The bees are very busy keeping things clean, and the bees take, as they hatch out, they have different jobs through the colony as they get older, so they start off looking after the baby bees, tending the larvae, and then they progress to be workers, foraging later.
And there we go. What an interesting short video there from Hayley, all about bees. I'm going to say cheerio. Make sure you share your science with us, because I would love to start next week's Wonder Wednesday by sharing some work that you've done, just like I did with the school, finding the meteorites in their guttering. And I hope you have fun and find it interesting and informative making your model of a flowering plant and learning a little bit more about all the parts that are so important to that process of pollination. Bye for now.